The morning air smelled of salt and cheap bleach. Rosa tightened her worn coat as the iron gates of the Moretti estate loomed ahead. She had one rule today: keep her head down for 3-year-old Lily. Inside the 30-room mansion, marble floors reflected a cold, museum-like silence. Isabella, the Mafia boss's finance, blocked the hallway with designer heels and a sneer. "You are too poor to breathe this air," Isabella snapped, shoving Rosa's shoulder. Before Rosa could swallow her humiliation, Lily stepped forward from behind her mother's frayed skirt. "You can't boss my mom around." Lily's small voice pierced the heavy silence like a blade. Isabella froze in sheer disbelief at the toddler's fearless glare. Rosa gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The heavy oak doors at the end of the hall swung open without a sound. Moretti stepped inside, his dark eyes instantly locking onto the scene. Rosa stood paralyzed, her fingers clutching the edge of her gray uniform. Murphy did not blink. The air in the grand hall grew 10 degrees colder. Isabella forced a tight, brittle smile onto her painted lips. "Darling, you are just in time to see me clean out the trash." Murphy walked past her without a single word. His boots clicked against the marble with terrifying rhythm. He stopped directly in front of 3-year-old Lily. Lily raised her chin, clutching her stuffed elephant tighter against her chest. She did not look away from the towering Mafia boss. "You are very tall," Lily whispered. Murphy stared down at the tiny child in the red wool hat. A muscle ticked along his jawline. "Who taught you to speak like that?" Murphy asked. "My mama taught me to be brave," Lily replied without hesitation. Rosa felt the blood drain entirely from her face. She expected Murphy to roar with fury. She expected him to throw them out into the freezing rain. Instead, Murphy slowly turned his cold gaze toward Isabella. Isabella stepped back, her bravado cracking instantly. "Murphy, she is just a filthy servant's brat," Isabella hissed. Murphy raised his gloved hand just an inch. Silence fell over the 30 rooms of the estate. "No one speaks to a guest in my house that way," Murphy said. Isabella gasped, her chest heaving in absolute shock. "You are defending them over me?" Murphy looked her dead in the eye. "I am correcting a mistake in my own hallway," Murphy replied. Signora Ferretti stood stiffly in the shadows, watching the earthquake unfold. She had served the Moretti family for 30 years. She had never seen Murphy look at anyone the way he looked at Rosa just then. It was not pity. It was an awakening. Murphy turned his back entirely on his fiancée. He knelt down on the cold marble floor. He brought his face down to Lily's eye level. "What is your name, little one?" Murphy asked, his voice losing its razor edge. "I am Lily, and this is Signor Tromino," Lily said proudly. Murphy reached out and touched the ear of the worn stuffed elephant. A rare, fleeting shadow of a smile crossed his lips. "An honor to meet you both," Murphy murmured. Rosa watched in a daze, her mind refusing to process the reality. The most feared man in Italy was kneeling before her daughter. Isabella stormed down the hall, her high heels clicking furiously. "You will regret this day, Murphy," Isabella screamed before slamming the front doors. Murphy stood up slowly, dusting his trousers. He looked straight at Rosa. "You report to the study in 10 minutes, Rosa," Murphy commanded. Then he turned and vanished up the grand spiral staircase. Rosa's knees trembled as she carried Lily toward the back kitchen. Signora Ferretti appeared out of nowhere, her expression unreadable. "Do not keep him waiting, child," Signora Ferretti whispered. Rosa set Lily down on a stool with a coloring book. She smoothed down her frayed sleeves. She walked down the long, silent corridor toward the heavy mahogany door. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer blow against her skull. She knocked twice, softly. "Come in," Murphy's voice echoed from within. The study was vast, smelling of old leather, tobacco, and expensive bourbon. Murphy stood by the tall window, looking out over the cypress trees. He did not turn around immediately. Rosa stood by the door, her hands clasped tightly together. "You saved my engagement from becoming a life sentence," Murphy said quietly. "Signor Moretti, I am truly sorry for the disruption," Rosa stammered. Murphy turned around, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Do you know why I keep this house so quiet, Rosa?" Rosa shook her head slowly. "Because everyone here is afraid of me," Murphy said. "Except for a 3-year-old girl in a red hat." Rosa swallowed hard, stepping back slightly. "She does not know any better, Signor." "That is why she is dangerous," Murphy murmured, taking a step closer. He reached out and placed a small, white porcelain cup on the edge of the desk. "Black, no sugar, just how you like it." Rosa stared at the cup in absolute disbelief. "How did you know?" "I notice everything that enters my house," Murphy replied smoothly. "Especially things that do not belong with the trash." Before Rosa could form a single word of reply, Murphy walked past her. He opened the study door and gestured outward. "Take your daughter home for today, Rosa. We begin the real work tomorrow." Rosa grabbed her coat, scooped Lily into her arms, and fled the estate. The cold night air hit her face as the iron gates clicked shut behind them. She looked down at Lily, who was already half asleep against her shoulder. "Mama, the sad man is not so sad anymore," Lily mumbled into her neck. Rosa clutched her daughter tighter, knowing her life would never be the same again. The cold marble corridor of the Moretti estate stretched out like a frozen river under the pale morning light. Rosa clutched the edge of her cleaning cart, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. She could still feel the phantom heat of Isabella's cruel slap burning against her cheek from the previous evening. The entire household was walking on eggshells. Every guard, every maid, every senior staff member knew that the tectonic plates beneath the villa had shifted. Murphy Moretti had knelt. He had knelt before a 3-year-old child in a red wool hat, directly defying the oldest alliance in the northern ports. And now, the consequences were cascading through the estate like a slow-moving earthquake. Signora Ferretti appeared from around the corner, her black dress immaculate, her silver hair pinned with surgical precision. She did not smile. She never smiled. She stopped beside Rosa, her eyes scanning the corridor to ensure no one else was within earshot. "Listen to me very carefully, Rosa," Signora Ferretti murmured, her voice like dry leaves scraping across stone. "The master has given a direct order. No one is ever to question your work again. Not the senior staff, and certainly not the family associates." Rosa looked up, her dark eyes wide with bewilderment and sudden sharp fear. "That will only make them hate me more, Signor. Isabella will not let this go." "Isabella is finished here," Signora Ferretti said flatly, her tone leaving zero room for argument. "You do not understand the rules of this house, child. When the master breaks a plate, it stays broken. Go to the study. The master has left your second cup." Rosa swallowed hard, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She pushed her cart down the silent hallway, her feet feeling like blocks of lead. When she reached the heavy mahogany doors of the master's study, she hesitated for a fraction of a second before lifting her knuckles to rap twice against the polished wood. "Come on." The deep, resonant voice cut through the heavy oak before her fingers even grazed the surface. Rosa pushed the door open, stepping into the familiar scent of old leather, pipe tobacco, and expensive bourbon. Moretti sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a stack of shipping manifests spread out before him. He was not wearing his jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the top collar, revealing the clean, sharp lines of his throat. He did not look up immediately. He let Rosa stand there in the center of the vast room, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. "You are late by 42 seconds, Murphy said, finally raising his dark, piercing eyes. "I had to clear the East Wing hallway, senor," Rosa replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Murphy stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He looked past her uniform, past her frayed cuffs, past the faint, fading bruise on her cheekbone. He looked at her the way a general evaluates a soldier who has survived the first wave of a brutal siege. "Look at the desk," Murphy commanded softly. Rosa lowered her gaze. There, resting precisely on the small brass coaster, was a fresh white porcelain cup. Beside it lay a small, leather-bound volume of poetry. "You did not finish your coffee yesterday," Murphy noted, his tone devoid of accusation, carrying only a strange, heavy curiosity. "I had to take Lily back to the back kitchens, senor. She gets restless when I am trapped in the main halls for too long." "Let her be restless," Murphy said, standing up from his heavy leather chair. He walked slowly around the desk, stopping just a few feet away from her. "A child has every right to roam this house. It is too large for ghosts and far too large for silence." Rosa did not know how to answer. She kept her eyes fixed on the silver buttons of his waistcoat. Every instinct she had developed over 2 years of widowhood screamed at her to retreat, to build walls, to protect herself and her daughter from the terrifying gravity of a powerful man. And yet, standing here in the dim morning light, she felt something entirely foreign. She felt seen, not as a piece of furniture, not as a disposable housekeeper. She was seen as a human being who mattered. "My engagement to Isabella is officially terminated," Murphy said casually, as if he were discussing the weather in Genoa. Rosa gasped, her head jerking upward in pure shock. "Senor Moretti, you cannot simply—" "I can, and I have," Murphy interrupted, his voice cutting through her protest like a knife through silk. "The Romano family will retaliate, senor. Their shipping routes control half the northern ports." "Let them try," Murphy murmured, a dangerous, cold shadow passing over his features. "For 10 years, I have allowed parasites to wrap themselves around my life because it was convenient for business. I am done with convenience." He reached out, his gloved hand hovering just an inch from Rosa's shoulder before pulling back, as if catching himself at the very last second. "Go back to your work, Rosa, and drink the coffee. It is already getting cold." Hours later, the tension in the villa reached a boiling point when Isabella Romano swept through the front doors like a tropical storm. She was not alone. 2 armed guards from the Romano security detail flanked her, their dark suits bulging at the ribs where shoulder holsters hid imported Berettas. Isabella's face was twisted in a mask of furious humiliation. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly her scalp looked stretched. "Where is he?" Isabella screamed, her high heels shattering the quiet dignity of the grand foyer. Signor Moretti stepped out from the library, her hands folded immaculately over her black apron. "The master is busy, Signora. You have no right to enter this estate without an appointment anymore." "Get out of my way, you old witch," Isabella shrieked, shoving past the elderly housekeeper with enough force to send her stumbling against the marble pillar. Rosa, who was dusting the base of the grand staircase, froze. She watched as Isabella marched straight toward the double doors of Murphy's study. Isabella did not bother to knock. She kicked the mahogany door open with the toe of her stiletto, the loud bang echoing through the entire east wing. Murphy did not even flinch. He sat behind his desk, slowly turning a silver fountain pen between his fingers, his expression as impassive as a block of alpine granite. Isabella slammed her hands down on the mahogany surface, leaning forward until her face was inches from his. "Have you lost your absolute mind, Murphy? Throwing me away for a filthy, penniless scrub woman and her brat? The entire Northern Syndicate is laughing at us." "Let them laugh," Murphy replied, his voice dropping an octave into a low, terrifying register. "Laughter is cheap. Insanity is believing you could strike a member of my household in my own hall and walk away with a ring on your finger." Isabella's breath hitched. Her chest heaved violently under her crimson silk blouse. "You think you are untouchable because of the Moretti name, don't you? You think no one can touch you? Wait until my father hears about this. The Romano family will cut off every supply line from the Mediterranean. Your ports will rot. Your ships will sink. And that little whore you are protecting." Before Isabella could finish the sentence, Murphy stood up. The sheer height and pressure of his presence forced Isabella to stumble backward 2 full steps. Murphy walked around the desk, his eyes locked onto hers with a predatory coldness that made the air in the room feel unbreathable. "If a single word about Rosa or her child ever leaves your mouth again, Isabella," Murphy whispered, every syllable dripping with lethal intent, "your father will not have to cut off my supply lines. Because I will personally burn your family's estate to cinder and scatter your ashes across the bay. Get out of my house." Isabella stared at him, her lower lip trembling with mixture of rage, betrayal, and absolute, primal terror. She realized then, with terrifying clarity, that she had pushed a sleeping beast too far, and the beast had finally decided to wake up. "You will regret this, Murphy," she choked out, her voice breaking. "You will beg for me back." She turned on her heel and fled from the study, her guards scrambling to keep pace behind her as she bolted out of the villa. Down in the East Wing hallway, Rosa had heard every single word. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew the magnitude of what had just happened. Moretti had declared war on the Romano family, not for territory, not for money, but to draw a line in the sand around her and her 3-year-old daughter. Signora Moretti walked silently down the hall, stopping beside Rosa. The old woman looked down at Rosa with a deeply solemn expression. "He has drawn the sword, child," Signora Moretti whispered. "In our world, a sword drawn is never returned to its sheath without blood. You must keep your daughter close, and you must trust no one outside these walls." Rosa gripped her cleaning cloth so hard her knuckles turned translucent. She thought of Lily, playing in the small back kitchen with her stuffed elephant, entirely unaware that the most powerful men in Italy were currently drawing battle lines over her head. "I did not ask for this, Signora," Rosa whispered, her voice cracking. "None of us asked for the cards we are dealt, Rosa," the old woman replied softly, placing a dry, wrinkled hand over Rosa's clenched fist. "We only get to choose how we play them." With that, Signora Moretti turned and walked away into the shadows of the corridor. Later that evening, long after the last guest had departed and the heavy iron gates had been locked for the night, Rosa sat in the small back kitchen, packing her canvas bag. Lily was already fast asleep on a cot in the corner, her small face peaceful, one hand clutching the worn ear of Signor Trombino. The red woolen hat lay on the small wooden table beside her. Rosa looked at her daughter, a wave of fierce, protective agony washing over her soul. She knew that staying in this house was becoming a death sentence. Every day she lingered here, she was pulling Murphy Moretti deeper into a war he did not need to fight, while simultaneously exposing her child to the crossfire of the criminal underworld. She had to leave. She had to take Lily back to the old Ferrara district, pack what little they owned, and catch the first train south before the Romano family made good on their threats. Rosa reached for her coat hanging on the back of the door. As her fingers brushed the frayed wool, a sharp knock sounded at the back kitchen door. Not loud, just two precise, measured raps. Rosa froze. She slowly turned around, her breath catching in her throat. The door swung open before she could utter a single word. Murphy Moretti stood in the doorway. He had taken off his suit jacket entirely. His black shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing the clean, powerful muscles of his forearms, and the stark white bandage peeking over the edge of his collar where the motorway bullet had grazed him weeks ago. He looked tired, not the tired of a weak man, but the heavy, granite-like fatigue of a king holding a crumbling fortress together with his bare hands. "You are packing," Murphy said, his dark eyes instantly locking onto the canvas bag on the table. Rosa tried to steady her voice, stepping defensively between the doorway and her sleeping child. "Signor Moretti, it is late. You should not be in the servants' quarters." "Answer me, Rosa," Murphy said, stepping into the small kitchen, his presence instantly shrinking the room until the air felt thick and heavy. "Are you running away?" "I am leaving, Signor," Rosa corrected him, her chin lifting with a fragile, desperate courage. "This house is becoming a battlefield. My daughter does not belong in a war zone." "Neither do you," Murphy countered, closing the distance between them until he was standing just inches away. "Do you think running back to the old Ferrara district will keep you safe? Do you think the Romano family or Duca down in Naples will care where you sleep once they realize you are the only person in this world who can make me lower my guard?" Rosa stared up at him, her dark eyes flashing with a sudden, uncontrollable surge of anger. "And why should I be the one to pay for your enemies, Signor? What am I to you? A housekeeper? A convenient distraction from your lonely throne?" Murphy did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He looked down at her with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. "You are the only person who looked me in the eye and did not see a monster," Murphy said, his voice dropping to a harsh, raw whisper. "You are the only woman whose daughter reminded me what it feels like to be human." Rosa's breath hitched. Her defenses, built up through years of poverty, widowhood, and relentless survival, fractured down to their very core. She wanted to push him away. She wanted to scream that she was just a poor widow who wanted a quiet life. Instead, she stood frozen, trapped in the dark, burning gravity of his gaze. "Stay," Murphy murmured, reaching out to gently touch the edge of her frayed coat sleeve. "Stay in this house. Let me protect you. For once in your lives, let someone else carry the weight." Before Rosa could find the voice to answer, a soft rustle came from the corner of the room. Little Lily stirred on her cot, rubbing her sleepy eyes with the back of her tiny hand. She blinked up through the dim light, spotting the tall figure standing beside her mother. "This sad man is here," Lily mumbled, her voice sweet and heavy with sleep. Murphy looked down at the child. Without a second thought, the most feared Mafia boss in northern Italy lowered himself onto one knee on the dirty kitchen floor, bringing his face level with the sleepy toddler. "Yes, Piccolola," Murphy whispered, a faint, genuine smile softening the hard lines of his face. "The sad man is here." and he is not going anywhere. Rosa looked down at the two of them, the ruthless criminal overlord kneeling beside a poor widow's child, and felt the final walls around her heart collapse entirely. She knew then, with absolute terrifying certainty, that there was no running away left to do. The die was cast. The war had begun, and they were already standing in the very center of the fire. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Moretti library. Rosa knelt beside the low mahogany table, wiping away invisible dust. Her fingers moved with quiet, practiced precision. She thought about the morning's explosive confrontation. Isabella was gone, but her venom still lingered in the air. Rosa looked up and froze in place. A second small porcelain cup sat on the edge of the mahogany desk. It was placed precisely opposite the master's usual spot. Steam rose faintly from the dark liquid inside. Rosa stood slowly, her heart skipping a beat. She walked over and touched the side of the cup. It was warm, freshly poured, black coffee, no sugar. Exactly how she drank it every single morning. Signora Ferretti passed the open doorway without slowing her pace. "That one is for you, child," Ferretti murmured softly. The master left it before he rode down to the port. Rosa stared at the cup in utter disbelief. How could the most feared man in Italy know her personal habits? She lifted the cup to her lips and took a cautious sip. It was deep, rich, and perfectly brewed. Beneath the saucer lay a small brown leather-bound book. Rosa picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a pocket edition of Neruda's poems. A folded slip of paper slid out from the front cover. Murphy's bold, sharp handwriting filled the page. "You seem to read on the bus. This one is light." Rosa pressed the note against her chest. A strange, unfamiliar warmth bloomed behind her ribs. In the back kitchen, 3-year-old Lily played quietly with Signor Trombino. The little elephant sat upright beside a chipped porcelain teacup. "Drink your tea, Signor Trombino," Lily whispered earnestly. "The sad man is coming back soon." Murphy Moretti did not return until late that evening. His dark coat smelled of cold rain and sea air. He walked past the grand staircase and headed straight for the back kitchen. He pushed the heavy wooden door open with a soft click. Lily looked up from her coloring book without a shred of fear. "You are back, the tall king," Lily announced. Murphy stopped dead in his tracks. A faint involuntary twitch touched the corner of his mouth. "I am back, Piccola," Murphy replied in a low rumble. "Did you bring any magic today?" Lily asked, tilting her head. Murphy reached into his deep coat pocket. He pulled out a small, smooth wooden bird carved by a port artisan. He placed it gently on the wooden table in front of her. Lily gasped, her dark eyes widening with pure delight. "It flies without wings," Lily whispered, tracing the wood. "Only if you believe it does," Murphy said softly. Rosa stood frozen in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. She had never seen this side of the Mafia boss. The cold, terrifying overlord of Genoa did not exist here. There was only a lonely man and a fearless child. Murphy looked up, catching Rosa's gaze in the dim light. His dark eyes held hers for a long, heavy second. "You work too hard, Rosa," Rosa said quietly. "I am only doing my duty, Signor," Rosa answered, lowering her head. Murphy stood up, towering over the small kitchen space. "Duty ended an hour ago, Rosa. Go home to your apartment. My guards will take you safely through the district." Rosa wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. She scooped Lily into her arms, grabbing her worn coat. As they stepped out into the chilly night, a black armored car waited. The driver held the door open with a solemn nod. Rosa climbed inside, pulling Lily close to her chest. She looked back up at the third-story window of the villa. Murphy stood behind the glass, watching them lead in the dark. The distance between them was shrinking every single day. And somewhere far to the south, dangerous eyes were watching too. The morning mist clung heavily to the cypress trees of Centilario. Rosa moved through the grand library with quiet, practiced steps. Her fingers dusted the mahogany table where the second coffee cup always waited. She picked up the small brown leather volume of Neruda poems. She slipped it into the pocket of her frayed winter coat. In the back kitchen, little Lily sat on her tall wooden stool. Signor Trombino rested securely beside a chipped porcelain teacup. The wooden bird carved by the port artisan lay in Lily's small palm. "It flies without wings, Mama," Lily whispered, with absolute certainty. Rosa smiled, feeling a rare, fragile peace settle over her chest. She had survived the first month in the lion's den. She had earned the silent, terrifying respect of the master of the estate. Down in the southern port of Naples, the air was thick with volcanic dust. Vittorio Duca sat by the edge of a black rectangular swimming pool. His pale linen shirt contrasted sharply with the dark stone statues around him. Bruno, the dismissed bodyguard of Isabella, stood respectfully behind his chair. "Moretti has ended the engagement for a mere housekeeper," Bruno muttered bitterly. Vittorio set his glass of Amaro down with a precise, cold click. "A man who has had nothing to love for 10 years now has a weakness." Vittorio turned his head, his eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. "We execute Plan A on the highway to Rome next week. If that fails, we take the child from the bus stop before dawn." Back in Genoa, Murphy Moretti stood in his private basement war room. 3 armored maps were pinned against the reinforced concrete wall. His black shirt was buttoned to the top, the sleeves rolled to his elbows. The white gauze bandage across his left shoulder remained clean and tight. He knew the southern families were moving their chess pieces in the dark. He had doubled the guards along the old Ferrara district bus route. He had given strict orders to his top capos to secure every perimeter. Yet a heavy, suffocating premonition pressed against his ribs. He looked down at the corner of the map table. A dusty gray elephant ear peeked out from beneath a steel clipboard. Signor Trombino had been recovered from the bakery street by his search team. Murphy reached out and touched the worn plush trunk with 2 fingers. He did not smile, but his dark eyes darkened by a single shade. He knew what was coming. He knew the war could no longer be avoided. In the quiet sanctuary of the villa, Rosa poured herself a cup of black coffee. She stared out the tall kitchen window toward the sprawling sea. For 2 years, she had lived in the freezing shadows of widowhood. For 2 years, she had believed the world was only a place of endurance. Now, a cold, powerful mafia boss was rewriting the rules of her survival. She touched the small silver star resting against her collarbone. The chain was wrapped with a single thread of cotton where it had once broken. She thought of the way Murphy had knelt before her daughter on the marble. She thought of the way his dark eyes held hers without judgment or pity. It was not love, she told herself firmly. It was something far more dangerous. It was an alliance born from the ashes of 2 broken lives. In the courtyard below, the black iron gates clicked shut. The heavy afternoon shadows stretched across the meticulously cut hedges. Murphy Moretti walked out of the side entrance toward his waiting vehicle. He was heading toward the northern border for a crucial shipping meeting. He did not look back at the third-story window. But Rosa watched him from behind the glass until his car vanished into the fog. Neither of them knew that the trap was already closing. The A1 motorway stretched like a black ribbon through the Tuscan hills. 3 armored SUVs cut through the Prud'hon fog at terrifying speeds. Moretti sat in the center vehicle, his jaw set in stone. A slim folder of shipping documents rested quietly on the leather seat. Without warning, 3 unmarked cars erupted from a roadside service lane. They slammed across the lanes, blocking all escape routes instantly. Automatic gunfire shattered the reinforced glass in a deafening roar. Bullets tore into the lead vehicle before the driver could even brake. Murphy threw himself sideways with cold, lethal precision. His combat boot kicked it on the far door, sending him rolling onto the asphalt. A stray bullet grazed the top of his left shoulder. Blood erupted instantly, soaking through his white shirt in a jagged red line. Murphy did not flinch, nor did he scream. He pressed his back against the concrete guardrail with icy calm. He drew his heavy black pistol from his inner coat pocket. His men returned fire with ruthless, calculated efficiency. The ambush was an exact signature of Vittorio Duca's northern cell. 15 minutes of concentrated hell turned the highway into a war zone. 2 attackers lay motionless on the smoking concrete. The rest scattered like rats into the dark pine forest. Murphy stood up slowly, blood dripping from his left sleeve. 2 of his loyal guards were dead inside the shot-riddled vehicles. He called off the trip to Rome with a single clicked command. "Turn the convoy around. We go back to Genoa tonight." The Black Fleet reversed direction, racing northward through the midnight shadows. By 2 in the morning, the armored cars rolled through the iron gates of the villa. Signora Ferretti was asleep, and the personal doctor was hours away in Torino. Murphy stepped into the side entrance, his shirt front soaked in dark blood. Rosa was still inside the grand estate working late on the weekly ledgers. She pushed open the study door and froze in horror. "Signor Moretti, you are bleeding," Rosa gasped, rushing forward. "Bring the medical kit from the upper corridor," Murphy ordered softly. Rosa's hands shook, but her training took over instantly. She returned in seconds with clean gauze, scissors, and strong antiseptic. She knelt beside his chair, her fingers brushing his warm skin. She cut away the ruined white fabric with steady precision. The wound was long, ugly, but mercifully shallow. "Why does blood never frighten you, Rosa?" Murphy murmured, watching her face. "My husband died in my arms on the harbor, Signor," Rosa whispered. "After that, nothing in this world has the power to terrify me." Murphy's dark eyes softened as he looked down at her bruised knuckles. When she finished bandaging the shoulder, she tried to pull away. Murphy caught her wrist with a gentle, immovable grip. "Rosa," he said, his voice dropping an octave. She looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs like trapped wings. "Thank you, Rosa." She drew her hand back slowly and walked out into the silent corridor. Murphy sat alone in the dark, staring at the empty doorway. He knew the war had officially begun. He knew the next target would not be him, but the little girl in the red hat. Neither of them knew that the final countdown had begun. The morning sky over the old Ferrara district was bruised and gray. Rosa held 3-year-old Lily's small, warm hand tightly. They walked their usual path toward the bus stop at Via della Vina. Lily wore her red woolen hat pulled low over her curls. Signor Trombino was clutched firmly under her free arm. 3 men in bright orange coveralls loitered by a rusted rubbish lorry. A black van sat in total silence in the shadows of the church. No other souls stirred on the narrow cobbled street. As Rosa and Lily drew level with the lorry, the trap snapped shut. Two men lunged outward from opposite directions with terrifying speed. Rosa screamed, a sound born of pure, primal instinct. She slammed her heavy boot heel straight into the first attacker's shin. A sickening crunch echoed off the ancient stone walls. She spun instantly, throwing her body like a shield over Lily. She bit down hard on the wrist of the second man reaching for her child. Hot blood filled her mouth, but she did not let go. 4 men closed in, a merciless tide of muscle and steel. A heavy fist crashed into Rosa's stomach with brutal force. She collapsed onto the unforgiving cobblestones, gasping for air. She dragged herself back up by sheer willpower alone. She threw herself at the man who hobbled her daughter off the ground. She clawed, she screamed, she struck with the fury of a cornered lioness. A heavy rifle butt came crashing down against the side of her skull. The world turned blinding white, then instantly black. They threw both unconscious bodies into the back of the roaring van. "Mama!" Lily shrieked in absolute terror as the doors slammed shut. During the violent struggle, Signor Trombino slipped from Lily's grasp. The gray plush elephant tumbled hard onto the cold cobblestones. At the exact same moment, the thin cotton thread of Lily's silver star snapped. The 5-pointed pendant bounced once and vanished down a dark drain grate. The black van screeched away toward the abandoned industrial zone of Lovera. 40 minutes later, an old baker woman found the toy on the street. She clutched the gray elephant and ran in blind panic toward the nearest phone. Up on the hill of Sant'Ilaro, the war room lights burned fiercely. Moretti stared at the blinking red coordinate on the digital map. His left shoulder throbbed beneath the fresh white gauze bandage. A guard rushed into the room and placed a dusty gray elephant on the table. "Signor Trombino was recovered from the street corner, sir." Murphy picked up the stuffed toy with 2 cold sugars. He tucked it inside his black shirt directly over his racing heart. He drew his heavy automatic pistol from the holster. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it froze every man in the room. "If they touch a single hair on our head, burn Volturi to ash." 3 armored vehicles tore through the gates of the estate in the dark. The final war for survival had officially begun. The white hospital room smelled of harsh antiseptic and cold autumn rain. Rosa lay motionless on the narrow, sterile metal bed. Her fractured ribs were bound tightly with thick white medical tape. Every shallow breath she took felt like inhaling crushed glass. Her face was a canvas of purple bruises and fading golden yellow patches. 3-year-old Lily refused to leave her mother's bedside for a single second. The little girl sat rigidly on a small, uncomfortable plastic folding chair. She clutched Signor Trombino tightly against her chest with both arms. The gray plush elephant's ears were still slightly damp from the drain water. But he was washed, he was whole, and he was safe. Outside the reinforced glass window, the sky over Genoa was heavy and gray. The door of the private hospital suite clicked open with a soft mechanical hiss. Moretti walked into the quiet room without making a sound. He did not wear his signature dark leather gloves today. He carried no hidden weapons, no threat-filled ledgers, no cold corporate demands. His broad shoulders carried only the weight of a quiet, unshakable resolve. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his dark eyes seeking over Rosa's pale face. A small, velvet-covered box rested securely in his large palm. He stepped forward and placed the box gently on the metal bedside table. Rosa slowly opened her heavy eyelids. her dark eyes filled with quiet, profound exhaustion. "What is this, Senor Moretti?" Rosa whispered, her voice rough and dry. Murphy did not answer immediately. He reached out with slow, deliberate fingers and lifted the velvet lid. Inside, resting upon a bed of pristine white silk, lay the small silver star pendant. It had been meticulously polished until it gleamed like a newly struck coin. The broken chain had been seamlessly soldered back together by a master craftsman. My men spent 3 full days searching every inch of the old drainage grid. Murphy said softly, his voice deep and steady in the quiet room. They did not sleep, and they did not stop until they pulled it from the mud. Rosa stared down at the small silver star. She reached out with trembling, bruised fingertips and touched the cold metal. A single, heavy tear broke free from her eyelashes. It traced a slow path down her bruised cheek and fell onto the white sheet. "Why do you risk everything for us, Murphy?" Rosa asked, her voice cracking. Murphy looked down at her with unshielded, raw, terrifying honesty. "Because for the first time in 10 years someone laughed in my house. You brought life back into a dark, dead place, Rosa." Lily looked up from her folding chair with wide, incredibly serious eyes. She had been thinking about this moment for 3 long, terrifying days. "Senor," Lily piped up in her clear, ringing, small voice, "I do not know where my real papa is now. He went away on a big boat and never came back to our kitchen." Murphy turned his gaze slowly away from Rosa and looked down at the little girl. Lily clutched her red woolen hat tightly in one small hand and leaned forward. "My mama says you are brave like a real king. Are you allowed to be my papa now?" The entire hospital room fell into a breathtaking, absolute silence. The hum of the heart monitor seemed to stop for a terrifying heartbeat. Rosa held her breath, her heart slamming violently against her broken ribs. Murphy did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He did not blink and he did not look away. He lowered his tall, powerful frame straight down onto the cold linoleum floor. He knelt right there before the small child in the red hat. He placed his large, warm hand gently on top of Lily's soft, dark curls. "It means I will protect you for the rest of my life," Murphy vowed, his voice ringing with absolute truth. "It means no one will ever make you or your mama cry again. It means my house is your house, and my blood is your shield." Lily smiled, her dark eyes shining with pure, unadulterated childish joy. "Then you are Papa Murphy." Murphy looked up slowly, meeting Rosa's tear-filled gaze across the hospital bed. A rare, complete, devastatingly handsome smile touched the corners of his lips. Rosa let out a long, shuddering breath, her hand sliding across the sheet. She placed her fingers gently over the back of his warm hand. He turned his palm upward and locked his fingers securely around hers. The war was over. The dark storm had broken against an unbreakable wall, and in the quiet, white room, a new family was finally born. 3 months passed after the dark storm of the warehouse. The autumn wind carried the scent of ripening lemons across the hills of Sant'Ilario. 3 months had bled quietly into the rhythm of the grand Moretti estate. Every lingering shadow of the Voltri warehouse fire had finally been scrubbed away. Rosa's fractured ribs healed completely into strong bone. Rosa walked down the polished marble corridors with her head held high and steady. Her dark hair was no longer tied back in a hurried, nervous knot, the severe bruises across her cheek fading to smooth skin. She wore a soft cashmere sweater gifted by Signora Ferretti on a quiet Sunday morning. The old housekeeper watched her from the doorway with an approving, silent nod. Moretti officially brought Rosa and Lily to lead at the villa. No one in the household ever dared to speak of the old days of subservience. Not as domestic servants, but as the true family of the estate. Lily's laughter echoed through rooms that had echoed only with dead silence for 12 years. Lily was given a sunlit bedroom beside her mother's suite. The sunlit bedroom in the east wing was filled with wooden toys and colorful books. The pale cream walls were painted to match the summer sky. Signora Trombino sat proudly on the embroidered pillows of a child-sized bed. On a clear Tuesday afternoon, the family walked into the lawyer's office. Moretti had personally supervised the installation of every single cushion. Murphy wore a tailored gray suit without a single speck of dust. He was no longer just the feared overlord who ruled the northern shipping ports. Rosa wore a simple navy dress patterned with white flowers. In the quiet privacy of the villa, he was simply a man learning how to be a father. Lily sat proudly in a leather chair, still wearing her red woolen hat. He spent his evenings reading fairy tales aloud in a deep resonant rumble. The legal adoption papers lay spread across the wide mahogany desk. Lily would fall asleep against her broad shoulder, her red woolen hat clutched in her hand. Signora Moretti stood as an official witness in her ironed black dress. Rosa would watch them from the doorway, her heart overflowing with a quiet, sacred peace. Don Vincenzo Barbieri rested his hands upon his heavy brass cane. The scars on her ribs had faded into thin, painless lines beneath her skin. Enzo, the former enemy, had turned his rifle, stood quietly by the door. The world outside the iron gates of Sant'Ilario continued its relentless pace. Murcia unscrewed his golden fountain pen with steady, quiet hands. In Napoli, the ruins of the Duca family empire had been carved up by surviving capos. He signed his name across the legal documents without hesitation. Don Vincenzo Barbieri ensured that the northern border remained sealed and secure. He turned to 3-year-old Lily and knelt beside her chair. Not a single rival dared to test the strength of the new Moretti alliance. "This paper means I will protect her for the rest of my life." Isabella Romano's downfall had been swift, merciless, and absolute. "It means my house, my name, and my blood are forever yours." Her encrypted messages recovered from Voltri servers had laid bare her treason. "It means if anyone ever threatens you, I will be there instantly." The heads of the 12 families met in emergency council behind closed bronze doors. Lily looked down at the dark ink drying on the white page. Within 24 hours, Isabella's father disowned her in a blistering public decree. "Does this mean you are really Marpapa now?" Lily asked softly. Every bank account bearing her name was frozen and distributed to charity. Murphy looked up at Rosa, meeting her gentle, approving eyes. She was escorted to the French border by 2 silent guards at midnight. "I am your Papa Piccola," Murphy answered from his heart. Now she resided in a cramped, drafty apartment on the outskirts of Nice. Lily threw her arms around his neck, hugging him with all her strength. Her expensive designer gowns were replaced by cheap, threadbare wool. "Papa Murphy," Lily whispered into his ear with pure joy. Her high heels sat broken in the corner of a damp, unheated hallway. Rosa laid her hand gently over Murphy's hand on the desk. No former friend answered her frantic phone calls or replied to her letters. He did not pull away, locking his strong fingers securely into hers. She had traded a kingdom for a momentary spike of petty malice. Meanwhile, Isabella Romano paid the ultimate price for her betrayal. And in return, she had been erased from the annals of high Italian society. Her secret messages to Vittorio Duca were exposed to the 12 families. Back in Genoa, the golden afternoon sun bathed the courthouse steps in warmth. Her own father publicly stripped her of the family name and wealth. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb with absolute military precision. She was banished from Italy, living in a small, damp flat in Nice. The driver stepped out quickly and opened the rear door with a solemn bow. No money, no title, no associates, completely erased and forgotten. Murphy emerged first, adjusting the cuffs at his immaculate charcoal gray suit, and the northern empire of Genoa, silence and absolute peace returned. He turned and offered his strong hand to help Rosa step down. Murphy, Rosa, and Lily walked out of the court into the warm sunshine. Rosa smiled, her dark eyes shining with a deep, unshakable confidence. The long, dark nightmare of widowhood and fear was officially over. She wore a tailored navy dress adorned with delicate white embroidery. The autumn wind carried the scent of ripening lemons across the hills of Sant'Ilario. In her arms, 3-year-old Lily clutched her inseparable gray elephant. 3 months had bled quietly into the rhythm of the grand Moretti estate. The iconic red woolen hat sat jauntily on top of her dark curls. Every lingering shadow of the Vulturi warehouse fire had finally been scrubbed away. Today was the final official sealing of their unbreakable family bond. Rosa walked down the polished marble corridors with her head held high and steady. The high ceiling of the civil courthouse smelled of old parchment and floor wax. Her dark hair was no longer tied back in a hurried, nervous knot. A distinguished judge with silver-rimmed glasses waited behind a polished oak bench. She wore a soft cashmere sweater, gifted by Signora Ferretti on a quiet Sunday morning. Signora Ferretti stood directly behind them in her immaculate black morning dress. The old housekeeper watched her from the doorway with an approving, silent nod. Her usually stern face was softened by a rare, genuine expression of joy. No one in the household ever dared to speak of the old days of subservience. Don Vincenzo leaned heavily on his brass-capped cane, nodding in silent respect. Lily's laughter echoed through rooms that had echoed only with dead silence for 12 years. Enzo stood by the tall, arched window, his arms folded across his broad chest. The sunlit bedroom in the east wing was filled with wooden toys and colorful books. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the outside world. Signor Trombino sat proudly on the embroidered pillows of a child-sized bed. The civil magistrate pushed a stack of thick legal documents across the desk. Murphy Moretti had personally supervised the installation of every single cushion. The gold embossing on the cover caught the sharp light of the desk lamp. He was no longer just the feared overlord who ruled the northern shipping ports. Article 4 of the Civil Code of Genoa governed formal adoption under special protection. In the quiet privacy of the villa, he was simply a man, learning how to be a father. Murphy did not blink as he read through every binding clause of the contract. He spent his evenings reading fairy tales aloud in a deep, resonant rumble. His hand did not tremble as he picked up the heavy gold fountain pen. Lily would fall asleep against her broad shoulder, her red woolen hat clutched in her hand. He signed his full legal name across the designated line with absolute finality. Rosa would watch them from the doorway, her heart overflowing with a quiet, sacred peace. Murphy Moretti, father, guardian, protector. The scars on her ribs had faded into thin, painless lines beneath her skin. He slid the papers across to Rosa, who added her signature with a steady hand. The world outside the iron gates of Sant'Ilario continued its relentless pace. Rosa Diaz, mother, partner, queen of his restored world. In Napoli, the ruins of the Duca family empire had been carved up by surviving capos. Finally, the magistrate turned the document toward 3-year-old Lily. Don Vincenzo Barbieri, ensured that the northern border remained sealed and secure. A special ink pad was pressed gently against the child's thumb. Not a single rival dared to test the strength of the new Moretti alliance. Lily pressed her tiny right thumbprint onto the bottom of the official state seal. Isabella Romano's downfall had been swift, merciless, and absolute. A crimson mark of ink permanently joined her destiny to the Moretti bloodline. Her encrypted messages recovered from Voltri servers had laid bare her treason. Murphy knelt down on one knee, right there on the courtroom floor. The heads of the 12 families met in emergency council behind closed bronze doors. He looked up into the big, dark, shining eyes of his newly adopted daughter. Within 24 hours, Isabella's father disowned her in a blistering public decree. "The paperwork is finished, Piccola," Murphy said, his voice deep and warm. Every bank account bearing her name was frozen and redistributed to charity. "You are officially, legally, and forever a Moretti." She was escorted to the French border by 2 silent guards at midnight. Lily tilted her head, her red hat sliding an inch down her forehead. Now, she resided in a cramped, drafty apartment on the outskirts of Nice. "Does this mean I never have to leave the big house with the lemon trees?" Her expensive designer gowns were replaced by cheap, threadbare wool. Murphy reached out and gently stroked her soft, curly hair. Her high heels sat broken in the corner of a damp, unheated hallway. "You will never leave, Lily, because it is your home now and forever." No former friend answered her frantic phone calls or replied to her letters. "And I am your papa, today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come." She had traded a kingdom for a momentary spike of petty malice. Lily squealed with pure, unadulterated happiness and threw her arms around his neck. And in return, she had been erased from the annals of high Italian society. "Papa Murphy," she cheered, burying her face against his broad shoulder. Back in Genoa, the golden afternoon sun bathed the courthouse steps in warmth. Murphy wrapped his strong arms around her, closing his eyes in silent gratitude. Rosa watched them, a single tear of pure relief slipping down her cheek. She reached out and placed her hand over the back of Murphy's neck. He turned his head slightly and pressed a soft kiss against her knuckles. The magistrate stamped the final document with a loud, satisfying thud. The court case was closed. The legal fiction of their separation was shattered into a million pieces. They walked out of the courthouse doors into the dazzling Italian sunlight. The air was sweet with the fragrance of coastal pines and blooming jasmine. A swarm of photographers stationed across the square raised their cameras. Before a single flash could blind them, Murphy's security detail moved in. 6 dark-suited bodyguards formed an impenetrable wall around the family. Not a single intrusive question was allowed to pierce their sanctuary. Rosa looked out and saw the sparkling blue expanse stretching endlessly outward. It was the exact same sea that had taken her husband 2 long years ago. Yet it no longer felt like a grave, but rather an open highway to the future. Murphy slipped his arm around Rosa's waist and pulled her close to his side. Her head rested comfortably against his solid, unyielding shoulder. The ghosts of the past were finally laid to rest beneath the weight of true love. They arrived back at the villa as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the lawn. The iron gates swung open smoothly, welcoming them into their true domain. Signora Ferretti stood on the grand stone steps with a tray of fresh lemonade. "Welcome home, my children," the old woman murmured with a rare smile. They stepped into the grand marble hall, where Isabella had once sneered in arrogance. Now, the house felt alive, breathing with warmth, music, and laughter. That evening, Murphy sat at the grand piano in the corner of the sitting room. He lifted the white cloth and folded it away into a cedar chest forever. His fingers touched the ivory keys, playing the gentle Chopin nocturne. Lily danced around the Persian rug, with Seigneur Trombino clutched in her arms. Rosa stood by the tall arched window, watching her new life unfold in real time. She was no longer hiding in the shadows of bus stops or frayed winter coats. She was a survivor who had fought through the fire and won her crown. The Mafia boss had found his redemption in the pure heart of a child. The broken housekeeper had found her fortress in the arms of a king. And the little girl in the red hat had found the father she never knew she had. The long, dark night of fear and poverty was gone for good. A new era of the Moretti dynasty had officially begun under the Italian sun. 12 years slipped away like water beneath the old Genoa docks. The afternoon sun spilled warm amber gold across the wide stone balcony. 15-year-old Lily leaned against the wrought iron railing, looking down at the sea. Her long, dark hair caught the gentle, salt breeze from the horizon. Rosa sat in a cushioned wicker chair a few paces behind her. A small, white porcelain cup rested quietly in her hand. The coffee inside was dark, deep, and entirely free of sugar. Murphy Moretti stepped out through the glass doors with quiet, unhurried steps. His hair was touched with silver at the temples, making him look even more formidable. He walked over and draped a soft woolen shawl over Rosa's shoulders. Rosa did not turn her head, but her hand rose to touch his. Murphy intertwined his fingers securely with hers, locking their Schoedkmaukt. Lily turned around, her dark eyes shining with bright, youthful intelligence. She wore a small silver star resting precisely against her collarbone. The chain was new, but the star was the same one her father had given her. "Papa!" Lily called out, her voice clear and ringing in the quiet air. "Do you remember when I told you that your heart was too quiet?" Murphy stopped, a soft, profound smile touching the corners of his lips. "I remember every single word, Piccola." Lily smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners just like her mother's. "You do not look sad anymore, Papa." Murphy looked down at Rosa, then out across the endless expanse of the blue ocean. Because the quiet house finally learned how to sing. Rosa set her cup down on the small marble table with a soft click. She stood up and stepped into the circle of her husband's arms. They did not need to speak anymore to understand each other's souls. Down below, the iron gates of the Moretti estate stood open to the world. No guard stood with fear in their eyes, only quiet, unshakable loyalty. The ghosts of the past were buried deep beneath the Neman trees. The brutal wars of the northern and southern empires were nothing more than dust. A former housekeeper had found her absolute sanctuary in the arms of a king. A feared mafia boss had found his redemption in the pure heart of a child, and a little girl in a red woolen hat had rewritten her entire destiny. Sometimes the most powerful weapons in the world are not guns or steel. Sometimes all it takes is a 3-year-old's voice to break a 10-year curse. And sometimes all it takes is a single question to heal a broken life. Are you all right? Yes. We are finally, perfectly, and forever all right.